Today, of course, as Laura was saying, and as you know, that the topic is the divine theme, and I wanted to deal with it in two ways, both talking about the book entitled The Divine Theme, and also I wanted to set that in the context of that subject matter in Baba's philosophy and theosophy or cosmology. We don't have a good word for whatever that might be. Both of those things. And as we go on, I hope, I like it better if you have some question or some point you want to raise to chime in. I think it makes it more fun and livelier and more interesting to me, and I get us, points tend to be forgotten. So if you have something to raise it. If it's too far removed from what the plan and I have, I might have to defer the question until later on. Please speak up as we go. You can
move the flowers.
I make all these notes, and then I sort of look at them in token way from time to time, but basically throw them into the trash can. As Laura was saying, Sorry. No, actually, I don't mind. It's okay. The original book was published in 1943, looking very much like this, and it just got republished. Actually, Sheila did the design work for it. It's a collaborative thing between Sheriar
Foundation
and Meher Manwani.
It's
called a facsimile, I believe.
Yeah.
It's close.
As close as
it's
possible.
close.
Yeah.
It's not entirely, because there's a new introduction and there are other little things at the front. But basically, it's a facsimile reproduction. Again, the cover is not identical, but it's very, very close. It's actually a very. This was especially for Indian sensibilities with this whole thing. But
It looks so rich, and yet
Yeah.
it's only $7.
Yeah. No, it's a wonderful. It's a wonderful item. And one reason, although this content has been available in God Speaks, we really wanted to republish it because of its importance, which I hope will come out in the course of today. As a topic, in brief, what the divine theme, what that phrase in Baba's usage refers to is that narrative of the soul's journey from the original state to the realization of God. Most of you doubtless are acquainted with this, where out of the beyond or beyond state, the soul emerges through the whim of God in most finite form, gas, rock, etc. Through the course of the evolution of consciousness, the soul acquires full consciousness in human form, and after the cycle of reincarnation, begins on the inward journey of involution through the 6 planes to realization on the 7th. That story, that narrative, is the divine theme. And it's really at the core, I feel, of Baba's metaphysics from the beginning until the end. Now, I'm going to set this in several contexts. One is in the context of very briefly of like spiritual tradition and the history of religion, those things. That you can do that in 5 minutes. It seems to me that this divine theme that Baba gave us is something quite new. Now, maybe I'm wrong, but I've been looking for a long time. I've been reading in a lot of the different spiritual literatures and asking everyone I can think of about it. And I don't see anything quite like it. I think the Avatar has really revealed to us this story. There are pieces of it you can find here and there, significant pieces. And I don't at all mean to disparage the religions or great men, nothing like that. I have the highest reverence for the great masters of the past. But the Avatar really did give an explanation that humanity has not had before. If you were to take, let's say, the Christian Gospels, which I love, they're beautiful stories of the life of Jesus and things that he would say kind of about the spiritual life and ethics and love for God and things like that. Or the Quran, you'll find very, very little in the Quran about the soul as such or God as such or the journey of the soul. There's really nothing there, as a matter of fact. In the great Greek philosophy, there's much more of this kind of thing. like in Neoplatonism, you'll have the idea of the soul originating in some kind of a oneness or goodness or God and returning in the end. And
Is that where the word God comes from, goodness, or is there a relationship?
the English word God comes from God, which is related to good, as a matter of fact. Okay. Yeah, but of course there have been many other languages in this picture, Greek and Hebrew and so forth, and in some of the great developments out of Greek philosophy and Christianity and Islam and Judaism. I know this may not be your field, but I'm actually just trying to illustrate the dimensions of the treasure Baba has given to us, just this little teeny community of Baba lovers around the world. You'll get a lot of understanding about the omnipresence of God, let us say, or the relations between the individuality and God from the Greek-derived tradition in Islam and Christianity. But you really don't get the story of the journey of the soul. In Buddhism, you hear a great deal about the falseness of the self, a tremendous understanding and treasures about that and how to annihilate it. But Buddha didn't affirm the reality of the self at all. In fact, he said there is no such thing. That's the essential message. So he would talk about how to achieve nirvana, but not where it came from or how we originated. And to tell the truth, I find the same in Vedanta and Hinduism. There's a tremendous vision of this reality and how ultimately it is one with the Brahman or God. But in all of this, the point I want to bring out is that you'll get a tremendous understanding about spiritual truth in a static way. How this creation, how this universe relates to God and how you find God through it and how it is God. But the element that Baba really contributed that is new is a specific narrative, a specific storyline about where we came from and where we're going to. People like stories, and this is the first time I know of that this story has been told in such a explicit way. There are pieces of it. Like you'd get the story of reincarnation and the journey to liberation and so forth. That piece you'd find in different places. But it's quite an extraordinary thing, a piece of understanding that the Avatar has given to the human race for the first time. I can only imagine that it must be only the Avatar has the sort of prerogative and the role to really revolutionize the philosophic understanding of the human race in this way.
Could I just say something?
Yeah.
In a lot of New Age literature, there is this emphasis on the journey across many lifetimes. But I've noticed that they invariably use the word evolution, the evolution of consciousness, to mean
right.
What Baba means by involution.
Right.
So
right.
there's not that understanding that consciousness would be complete in the human form.
That's right. That is one of the new pieces of understanding that Baba gave that is actually huge. It makes it so much, we'll come to that presently, that makes it so much coherent to understand evolution and involution. The rationale of the whole thing really makes sense. In the last couple centuries, the explanations of the universe that have come to prevail through a lot of the Western world and the whole world come from, science to a large extent, which has, contributed tremendously to our understanding. But in general, the scientific vision of the world has not incorporated a recognition of spiritual realities, and sometimes is actually adverse to that, is very materialistic. And thus we have, Darwinism, which has enriched the human understanding enormously about where human beings came from. But in this case, we have Baba incorporating evolution, but showing its spiritual source and its spiritual purpose. So it seems to me in the whole world there's this huge jumble of different understandings, and the different cultures are coming together, and often at loggerheads, and huge confusions all over the place. And in this situation, Baba has given in this one, this isn't all of Baba's metaphysics, the divine theme, but in the divine theme, something that creates an amazing coherency and really gives an answer, whither and whence, where did I come from and where am I going to, that is deeply satisfying. So this is an extraordinary treasure that he's given in the form of this theme in his teaching. I always have to use teaching or philosophy or metaphysics, and I hate those words. They're just not adequate. So put them all in quotes. Whatever you call this, that Baba's revelation about the nature of cosmological truth. Now, this theme in Baba's work, the divine theme, appeared very early and was present from the beginning till the end. It's really a centerpiece of what Baba had to explain to us. Very early on in Infinite Intelligence, which I'm sure all of you have committed to memory and know from beginning to end.
I can't even lift it.
That's right. If you can't read it, it's heavy in all ways. It's a heavy book in every way. But there you do see the divine theme. It's actually a bit rudimentary in that book. If you really want to understand the divine theme, it's kind of primitive, the form of it Baba gives. Actually, Baba will use the term evolution to mean the entire journey of the soul to beginning to end. The word involution came up later, but he'll talk about the different kingdoms of evolution. But really the focus of Infinite Intelligence is more on other things, although you will find the divine theme there. But see, I'm just going through some of the major stopping points in this journey of the divine theme through Baba's life and through Baba's books. Many of you are acquainted with the book Early Messages to the West, published by Sheriar, 2 years ago? 2009, was it? 2008? I forget. And it includes, as its fourth part, I don't know if I didn't bring the chart. Darn
The
it all.
chart's on the wall,
Oh, where is it?
right here.
Oh, yeah, okay. I'll point to it in a minute. It has, as its fifth section, the material that Baba prepared in 1934 to present in Hollywood for a film to be entitled How It All Happened. And so some of you will have perhaps read this content. These are like notes, but basically notes Baba was developing with the Mandali to present to Hollywood executives when he went there in December 34, January 35. And he had prepared a very large chart, which I don't know how well you can see it here. The original is like that high. It's like 8 feet by 5 feet. It's absolutely enormous. Probably Adi was the one who drew it. And what I want to be saying about it is this is another version of the divine theme, as a matter of fact. Because up here, here's where God originates and descends through the evolution of form and consciousness. That's what these two things are. If this were the topic, I'd have a lot to say about that. Then this is the transverse, this is the descending track. That's the term he used here. The descending track of evolution, the transverse track of reincarnation, and the ascending track of, he called it there, spiritual advancement, back to God again. It's again the cyclic journey, divine theme. He didn't use the term at that time. But one thing that I find to be very striking about it is that when Baba, you're probably basically acquainted with some of Baba's work at that time. He made 2 trips to the West specifically to get a film done. It didn't happen at that time. And the film, the subject was this. You might think that Baba would have wanted to have a film about love for God, to show people the path of love for God, since that was so much his emphasis for the most part. No, it was actually this story, the journey of the soul. That was the basic frame that he wanted humanity to understand. Then in the 40s, where did I put it? Discourses. Yeah. Of course, you're familiar with Meher Baba's discourses. Between 1938 and actually 1943, 1938 and 42, the Meher Baba Journal published the original form of most of the discourses, and then some more were published by 1943. But in the middle of them, there are 8 discourses on meditation. And the fourth one, Assimilation of Divine Truths, discusses the topic of what is a good object of meditation, and how the words of the living master are best, Baba says. But then he says the master isn't always there. So if the master isn't there, what do you do? And also there's some special virtue to something that's written because it's fixed and you can keep returning to it. He goes on a rap about that. And then saying, but of course the problem is how to find a suitable brief text for meditation. Well, as a matter of fact, the selection that follows is ideally suited for this purpose. It's quite funny to read it. And it is. He has a marvelous summary of what is called here the divine theme. It's at the end. I'm sure some of you are acquainted with this, right? It's at the end of the 4th discourse on meditation. And there's a process he provides where you should read it every day, and after a certain length of time, there'll be no need to actually read it once you know it well enough. You can just review it mentally. Yeah.
I'm not sure Laura would know. Is that what we just reprinted, Laura?
No,
Yes.
no.
No?
Yes.
No.
Reading is meditation?
Yes, it is.
We have
Oh,
the paper
that.
reading
Oh, I
is
thought you meant
Do you
just
have
that
it?
one.
Yeah,
Yeah,
we
that's
have
in
it.
it.
No, Kendra's right about that. But do you have it? Is it here?
Yeah.
Just that it's
I
not
want
the
to get
same
one,
as
yeah.
this. It's
Where is it?
not-
I could brandish it. Is
But,
it here somewhere?
I'll bring one out for you.
Yeah. Yeah, in fact, Chanji had published this back in the early 40s, as a matter of fact. So I was surprised when it was, it's a very suitable item. And it's...
But you were just about to say
yeah.
The third stage of that meditation is so interesting is that
Right, there's no need, right.
there's no need to even think about it. You just somehow dwell on it without
Right.
thought.
There's no need to think about it discursively and in a linear fashion. You can just bring the whole thing to mind all at once. That's actually the third stage of the process that Baba describes. And that's right in the introduction to the discourse. And as a matter of fact, I don't know how this happened, but in God Speaks, where this book, a completely different exposition of the subject, is presented, it's reproduced in God Speaks. And in the previous item, they reproduce this part from this discourse. And I wonder if they didn't mix it up and think that the divine theme here is the same as the divine theme in the discourses. That's my suspicion. But the divine theme and the discourses in this booklet are completely different pieces of writing. They're not related at all. Yeah. Although, of course, the fundamental content is the same because this is a subject, but completely different treatments of it.
This person's one is much shorter, right?
I'd have to count the number of words. It's the whole character and flavor of it is really different.
So what are you saying? I'm sorry, I was distracted and
Yeah.
back, so I lost the track.
Yeah.
You're saying there are 3 versions or 2?
Two.
Between God Speaks, that pamphlet, and the summary.
This little booklet is reproduced in God Speaks. It's the same.
Okay.
It's just here in the supplement, it's item 14. They have them, they're numbered. And what precedes it, item 13, is a reprint from the introduction to the discourse.
Oh, okay.
So if you read these 2 items in sequence, you would think that number 13 is a lead-in to number 14.
Right.
But in fact, it was written for this, not for that.
Right.
Are you following what I'm saying? So it really is misleading.
Do you think we should never read God Speaks?
I think we should burn them. And in fact, find out who's responsible and burn them too. It's time. We haven't had a good witch hunt recently. Although we're not all that bad at that in that department. Maybe I better shut up. I'm sure I could be a good witch myself. So, but this discourse was published, I think, in 1941, the middle of 1941, And this was in 1943. And, Infinite Intelligence in 1926, which is when I think Baba dictated, was never published then. It just was, in my opinion, was a talk Baba gave to his mandali, probably to his Min mandali. And then it got recorded and stuck away in some kind of archives back then. And so it no one ever knew about it except those who were there at the time. This 1934 material, Baba, presumably, along with this chart, which Baba gave great importance to, was presumably presented by Baba in Hollywood in December 34, January 35. One presumes so. But there was never any publication of it. In other words, this material never got out to the public at all. So what was new in the 1940s was that Baba started to actually give published public presentations of this idea, of this theme of his, this really revolutionary theme, twice in the 1940s, once in the discourses and once in the booklet, The Divine Theme, which I'll be coming back to in a minute. And as a matter of fact, since this just came up the other night, I thought I'd also show this. In fact, maybe this would be as good a moment as any to pass out some of the charts from the Divine Theme, because I'm just about to reform. We have a limited number of charts. Maybe, I don't know how to distribute it among everybody.
Probably enough.
Yeah, if you could sort of, share charts, or it'll be important later on to have access to one because I'm going to talk about them. Just for a brief glance, here's one chart looks like this, and the other chart looks like that. These charts were reprinted, or not reprinted, redrawn and published in God Speaks. Well, the reason I'm mentioning it at this moment is because of their use in a chart, another chart Rano Gailey drew for Baba. Let me see, where is it? Folds out somewhere. Yeah. Sometimes called the wedding cake chart. It's actually the 10 circles chart. Do you know this one? Have you? Yeah. If you go to the museum at Mehrabad, you'll see the original, and it's enormous. I don't know how, 15 feet high, or is it that big?
No, it's about
10?
8.
Eight,
Eight?
8 feet high.
Oh,
8
see,
by
an artist
5 or
would know.
something.
Yeah.
I wrote an article on it in the book.
Right. Kendra has
That
a.
must be true.
But
No, that's.
initially I made this really weird error that almost no one noticed, which was I said that I said that it was only a little taller than Baba himself, and yet it was 8 feet tall.
Well, I guess Baba looms large to Kendra. Yeah. Well, it's a very big chart. And but the reason I'm mentioning it is because if you look closely, these are the two charts from the Divine Theme. Can you see them? So there, Kendra reviews all of this in her article, a real marvelous article in the Glow a year ago, was it? So I think this chart was completed in 1943. Is that? I think it might be. So this would have been current, or she was working on it intense. She started several years before that. So that's an interesting little point. But then the end of the story, so far as this talk goes about the Divine Theme, is because God Speaks, where, in my opinion anyway, that narrative of the Divine Theme really provides one of the keys and cornerstone to the organization of God Speaks. The storyline, basically creation, evolution, reincarnation, involution to realization. God Speaks traces through that storyline 3 times. The first chapter is kind of a chapter of definitions, you might say, but chapters 2 through 7, or they're called series in God Speaks, goes through evolution, reincarnation, and involution in different ways. And then chapter 8, which is about 2/5 of the whole book. It's a very long chapter. Starts at the beginning, and from the whim, God's whim. Actually, that's where the word whim is first really used in a major way by Baba, in chapter 8 of God Speaks. And he goes through the whole story a second time. And then in chapter 9, and the 10 states of God, let me just show you this chart. I know it's a little hard to see them. But this is the chart, the 10 states of God. Can you see that? This is really another version of the divine theme. You start here, go down here, and back up here. One of the characteristics of the divine charts representing the divine theme is that they're flow charts. You move through them from one place to another. They're not analyzing a structure. They're a chart of a storyline. And to me and to many others, this chapter on the 10 states of God is the best single synopsis of Meher Baba's philosophy cosmology. And it's the third pass through the divine theme in the course of God Speaks. So this storyline really began very early. Baba first presented it in the early 1920s at Mirabad. I didn't even mention the Tiffin lectures where it comes up several times. And through Baba's work in the domain of film, through the discourses. And God Speaks is the greatest culminating presentation of that topic. So it is really central. If you want to understand Baba's philosophy and teachings, this is the central structure. There are other things as well. Baba gave a lot of stuff besides this. But this is the organizing principle to it. And you know, a very famous work I was a professor of literature, and a very famous work in literary criticism, probably the most famous, is by Aristotle. It's called Poetics. And he's talking about drama and tragedy, basically fiction, you might say. And he said that the most central element to it is the plot. And I've come to feel that that's actually true. A good story is probably what people like most in movies and novels and everything else. This is the story. This is the story Baba gave us. Which comes to do you want to bring up, I'm about to move on to other aspects of this. Do you want to bring up anything at this point about this? I was talking about the divine theme in the context of world, religion, and philosophy, and the divine theme in the context of Baba's own books and messages over the course of the years. Well, something I wanted about what the divine theme really is. It could be characterized as the biography of the soul. And that's, as I say, that I don't know of any great teacher who has told us this story before. And when we talk about the biography of the soul, we're really talking about the biography of you and me. That's really who this is about. This is our story. It seems very abstract when you first look at it. It might seem like an abstraction. And it is in a way. But it is actually much more our story than the stories that we imagine that we are. I mean, I've been, said this several times, but, like let's suppose someone were to ask, well, who are you? And tell me, what's your life story? Well, I'd start out, my name is Ward, and I was born in such a place, and I've done this, and I've done that, and all the different things. But in my last lifetime, I would tell a completely different story. I might have been a woman in India, and I might have talked about all the children I had, or whatever it might be. And the life of that, I was a soldier and died at the Battle of such and such. But in this present lifetime as Ward, I don't give a damn about those things. I don't remember them, and they have no interest to me at all. And in my next lifetime, I'll be somebody completely different, and I won't remember this lifetime as Ward one bit. And do you really spend a lot of time brooding about who you were 5 lifetimes ago? But back then, I'll bet you were. Does it even cross your mind? Maybe last lifetime. Who was I last? But let's say 14 lifetimes ago. But in that, if you live to be 80, you probably spent your whole time thinking about yourself to the extent that we do now, you know. Well, the point, and in my next lifetime, I won't remember this lifetime at all, and I won't care about it. And my reason for saying this is, this person who I think I am right now, how real is it? How real is it to me? If 100 years from now I don't give a damn about it, was it real? This is much more real to me, actually, than this whole life that I imagine that I am. I mean, Baba has told us this. This whole life we lead is a dream. And this is a dream too, but this is of a much higher order of reality to us than the present temporary fleeting dream that we imagine that we are. This is actually a story that we're going to be with for a long time and have been with for millions of years. And I mean, I think it's quite extraordinary that the Avatar has revealed this. No previous Avatar we know of did. Humanity wasn't at a place where it really asked these sorts of questions or would really have been interested. And what the Avatar gave was quite suited to those ages, and I'm not disparaging any of that. But now, in this age, you know, people say, well, if God is real and God is good, why is there evil? You know, all these sorts of questions people have, good questions. And the time has come where the Avatar really has to give an explanation of things that really satisfies. And this does. It not only does it satisfy abstractly, but he's telling us who we are. Not just who we are in the sense of we are God. Vedanta said that before. But where we came from and where we're going. The whole story is there.
Question. Then the next question is, but why can't you get anyone to take interest in this at this point in history? Why do people not, you know, who aren't Baba lovers?
I know, it's an amazing
And they don't
thing.
even want to look at it.
Yeah, I know.
It's just for our protection.
Well, I do think this, when the time comes, people will be run over by it. They won't believe that this was just sitting there. Such a fantastic, I mean, isn't this an incredibly good explanation of things? It's superb. I haven't even really gone in detail into what it all is. But I mean, you're all acquainted. I'm sure most of you are well acquainted with it from God Speaks and these other sorts of things.
Do you think that Baba deliberately does not want people to recognize it?
Yeah. It's premature. The thing is to really recognize, even apart from Meher Baba, to even recognize the divine theme and the explanations he's given, you have to really want it. You have to want an answer that really, really satisfies, not just. And humanity, and of course lots of people are seeking in their own way, and no doubt I don't want to disparage anyone's search or anyone's answers that they find. But in the course of time, humanity will find this. It cannot fail to happen. You know, I have really worked most of my life in sort of the intellectual arena and these sorts of things. And to me, it's very, very obvious that Baba was not a scholar and Baba was not an intellectual. He doesn't have all the traits of it at all. In fact, he tended to be not even like intellectuals a lot of times, or that sort of intellectualism. And yet, he gave, I mean, the content that he gave is unmatched by what the greatest philosophers could do if you multiplied what they did by 1,000. So it's really, and he's left a huge treasures for people with these interests. There's tremendous treasures to be found by digging into all this material. Okay, well now I wanted to start coming to this booklet. This was all in the divine theme in a broader sense. That's this topic in Baba's philosophy and cosmology. Have I said everything I meant to say about that? What was I going to say? Yeah. Now coming, all these books, where did I bury it at? Anyone see the divine theme, the little booklet?
It's under God Speaks, I think.
Oh, it's under here. Yeah. Here we go. Okay. Now, this little booklet had, in its original publication, and has now these same two charts in the front and back. Now they're in pouches. Originally they were attached to the book. So these charts are crucial parts of the book. And in fact, from best I can tell, and in my opinion, the charts are really the point of the book. I think the text is more or less an elaboration to enable you to understand the charts. That's my interpretation, but it looks like that to me. And that is, in fact, a difference between this booklet and that discourse. The discourse is really presenting the topic in words, and it does a beautiful explanation that way. But here, the primary thing, in my opinion, is indeed the charts. And there's a history behind them. During World War II, during much of the 1940s, World War II and going on for a few years beyond that, Baba had brought to an end his world tours and was doing very little in the way of public darshans, but instead was largely devoted to his work with the musts. But he also had several gatherings with groups of his lovers from India. And during World War II, you couldn't very well have people from the West unless you wanted a bunch of Germans bombing your ashram or something, or Japanese. But he did have several of these gatherings, and one of them was in 1943 in May, when he had 125 men from his lovers from around India gather at Mehrabad for 4 days. And various things went on, but as far as I can see, the main activity and the most distinctive activity centered on these two charts. Baba had Rano draw them up in the preceding month or two, and they were presumably... I think probably both charts were used in the gathering, although there are certain references to the chart as though there was only one. And this question came up recently, and I can't explain if there was one charter at the meeting or not. But one of those days, I think it was May 17th, Baba devoted the main activity of the day was Baba's explaining these charts to this group. And then, now get this, the next day the activity was a 12-hour silent meditation by that entire group on these charts. Now, isn't that extraordinary? I cannot think, Bill, did you ever see anything like that? I can't think of another time in Meher Baba's entire life. There were episodes you hear very rarely where Baba would have the mandali for short periods of time meditate on something. And there were certain individuals he had doing that as special work at certain times. No doubt about that. But to have a large group of his lovers in general on a full day silent meditation of any kind, as best I know, maybe this will turn out not to be true, but as best I know now, this was unique in Baba's whole lifetime. And look what it is they meditated on, the divine theme. So personally, what this suggests to me is that there is something archetypal here. In addition to whatever he was doing with his lovers, there was some work on the consciousness of humanity in this particular topic. And if there is anything you want to understand in the philosophic realm, this would be it seems to me. This story. And if ever I'm asked to give my submissions to the 101 names of God or Meher Baba or 1001, whatever the number is, one of them will be Meher Baba Chartwala. He was Chartwala from beginning to end. Baba may not have cared for mathematics, but he used diagrams all the time. From the 1920s, in Infinite Intelligence, has a whole slew of them. And the Tiffin lectures do too. And 1934, Baba made a big deal about this chart. In his letters, he was referred to it constantly. And here, in 1943, here we have it once again. And I fully appreciate why Baba would have done that. These charts are enormously helpful and illuminative in understanding what Baba wants to say. And something else that I have found out more and more, and especially in the last 5 or 10 years as I've worked on this material so intensively, Baba's charts are really good, and they're really worth, if you're interested in these things, they're really worth studying. When I first read God Speaks, for example, I saw this chart of Rano's, which probably most of you know. Where is it? Yeah, this one. You're probably all acquainted. This is one of the most famous of all the charts. You know this one? Right. And this is the divine theme, by the way. And if there's one single, it's not called that, but that's what it is. If there's one single emblem for the divine theme, this is probably the best. Here you see God in the beyond beyond and the beyond state. And out of gas, evolution proceeds. Here is involution. Here's reincarnation, the 8,400,000 lifetimes. Here's involution.
It's interesting that instead of these geometric symbols for things, there are little pictures of little people and everything.
Yeah, that's right.
More
Right.
engaging.
That's right. This is more, what would you call that? More illustration is incorporated. Illustrative elements, is that what you call it? Instead of just purely graphic. Yeah, they're wonderful and very vivid. Actually, that 10 circles chart does the same thing, and a number of his do. But having seen this, actually when you see this, it's like, I understand the divine theme. Doesn't it seem like that? Yeah. Because it's actually a very simple idea. It's so beautiful. So when I first read God Speaks, this wasn't in the first edition of God Speaks, by the way. This was only incorporated into the second edition. But I sort of thought, well, why are all these other charts there, you know? This says everything that needs to be said. That's sort of what I assumed. But I have come to understand that all of Baba's charts really have something to convey. If you take an interest, they're really, really worth it. It wasn't for no reason that Baba kept presenting some of the same themes in different forms.
Isn't it like bombarding you from all sides? Every possible way you can take it in is given.
Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of new information, or even if not new information, there's a new emphasis that brings a new aspect of it into view that you wouldn't get before. And that is certainly true of these two charts from the divine theme. Now, some of the, none of this is new to you, but I just wanted to point.
Just before the charts finish that, what's the last chart that Baba had drawn, I wonder? Maybe the 4 journeys, or what do you think?
I have to see what material there was from the mid to late 60s. I don't know whether some of that material from Bao was actually
all published, as far as you know.
Let me think. I'm not really so acquainted with material from the 60s. I saw some of this material Francis Brabazon took down in 1967 for a new edition of God Speaks, but I didn't see anything chart-wise. That's a very good question. I'd like to know. Yeah, actually. Yeah. I'll have to think about that and see if anything comes to mind. But now here are some of the elements in the divine theme that are really noteworthy. One is the whim. And, you know, actually Baba used to call it by different names. In Infinite Intelligence, sometimes it's called the first desire even. And through most of God Speaks, it's called the original urge. But in the 8th chapter, the great 8th chapter of it, when I first read God Speaks, the whole 8th chapter, I wasn't actually articulating this, but my sort of inner feeling was, why is Baba going? He said all this before. Why is he going over it again? But boy, I could give you 1,000 answers to that now. All sorts of reasons. But one thing that he starts to use the word, the whim of God. And in my opinion, this is one of the truly great ideas in the history of spiritual thought. And if there were time, I could say a lot of things about Islam and Christianity and Greek thought, where they, was creation eternal? And if creation was created in a moment of time, why did God create it at one moment of time instead of another? This is a big issue in early Islamic thought. Huge issue. They really fought about this a lot. And Baba doesn't answer it, but basically says it is unanswerable. It was a whim. And somehow that word, we know what a whim is. In fact, Baba gave an illustration for a whim one time. He said, like, let's suppose you're walking by a pool of water, and you just pick up a stone and throw it in. Well, I've done that 1,000 times. Why? Why? I couldn't give a reason, but the impulse is just sort of like you just have a whim to do it. God had a whim to know himself. And there's one place where Baba says, whenever you try to find a reason for something, well, that reason itself needs a reason. And that reason itself needs another reason. And this can go on forever. So in the end, all you can say is that it was a whim. And that's actually the first time I've ever seen that answer given. It's a whim, God's whim. I mean, this all by itself, if Baba had given up being an avatar and decided he was just going to be a regular old philosopher, and he never came up with another idea, man, he'd be, put Descartes and Kant and all these people into his, they'd be running to catch up just on the count of the whim, let alone everything else.
Warren, another parallel to that where Baba says that God didn't create the universe, he was produced. He made a big thing about that.
Right. In fact, in Infinite Intelligence, Baba might sometimes use the word God creating the universe as kind of a informal, quick way of saying things, but he makes it clear that actually there is no creation, nothing is ever created, because it never exists at all. That's the thing. And that's another, all of these, I can tell you, are huge, huge issues that have really bedeviled, the great philosophers and so forth. Now, another step in the story of creation has to do with creation itself, or non-create, whatever you want to give a term to this. And actually, God Speaks doesn't say a heck of a lot about this, but if you want to fill in more, how it all happened has a good bit more about the creation of nebulae, and also a major theme in Infinite Intelligence and how it all happened is the division between pran and akash. Pran, you know what prana is. It's like subtle, it's energy. And akash is space, or we could say better, not just space, but the potentiality for something happening in it. If something's going to happen, you need to have something that can accommodate it, a potential for something happening there. And that's really what Akash is. So there, Baba talks, brings up emphatically that was the first division that occurred in the course of creation. You wouldn't know that from God Speaks. God Speaks is a masterpiece, and it's the greatest synthesis of Baba's teachings metaphysically. But there is a lot that isn't there that you'll find in other books. And this is one of those things. This is another element in the divine theme. Then a huge contribution to the human understanding of these things that Baba gave was through articulating the role of sanskaras. Now, this is a very ancient word, and the idea is fairly old too, although I'd really love for someone to do... Kendra, you wrote something about this a while back. And I've seen the question coming up in various places. But I don't believe, in nowhere that I have seen, has the significance of sanskaras been really explained in the way that Baba has done. In particular, Baba's divine theme is based on God's whim to know himself. Thus, consciousness is critical to Baba's explanation of things. And before God can know himself, he has to wake up in the first place. He needs consciousness. How can he know himself if he's not even conscious? The whim originated prior to explicit consciousness. So the whole journey of evolution is the accumulation of consciousness. And that's why evolution and involution are different from each other. Involution is the return to God with full consciousness. So again, I haven't seen pieces of this you can find here and there, but this whole story, this idea is so simple, isn't it? I mean, it's really, if God wants to know himself, first he has to become conscious, and then he has to direct that consciousness towards knowing who he is. Baba was the first one I've seen to present this story in such a clear and explicit way as all this. And sanskaras are critical because they're the mechanism by which consciousness is captured.
Yeah, I've read about samskaras, you know, in a Hindu context as this kind of vehicle of karma. That's how, you know, it's carried. But, you know, the idea that you would have to balance them in a particular way, is, you know, Baba, I think, has completely...
I haven't quite seen that either. I mean, I've only read a limited amount, but I haven't seen the relation between karma and sanskaras developed in that sense.
I'll tell you later one book.
Okay, no, I'd like to see that. I have been reading some things on this, but Baba's this is where Baba's version of evolution. How would we say? I mean, it in a way stands Darwinian evolution. I'm not knocking Darwinian evolution. It was obviously a huge contribution to the human understanding of the universe, but it doesn't. It's not based on consciousness, whereas Baba's version is. The evolution of consciousness is the driving force that behind physical evolution, and the accumulation of sanskaras is the mechanism. You accumulate more and more sanskaras, and therefore need a more evolved physical form through which to express that greater and greater accumulated body of sanskaras. And finally, when you come to human form, consciousness is complete. And this, again, is unique to Baba as far as I know, explaining it in that way. And then you have this huge mass of sanskaras that you have to get rid of, which is done through the involution of consciousness. So Baba's exposition on this subject was on the significance of sanskaras. It seems to me is something, the idea was there, but the role and significance that Baba gave to it and the place that it assumes in his cosmology is really quite central and quite new. Now, in the involution of consciousness, actually Baba, as far as I know, Baba didn't really use the word involution until God Speaks. You'll find it in the 7th edition of the Discourses, but that was actually introduced by the editors of the 7th edition. The 6th edition, it's hardly ever, the word is not really used that way. But it's meant to be the counterpart to evolution. You go back the way you came, you might say, except with full consciousness and getting rid of sanskaras as you go. And now Baba has also given us some of the roadmap, some of the architecture of that return. We know that there are 7 planes, 6 within illusion and the 7th transcending it. There are 3 spheres, gross, subtle, mental, and in the course of involution you go through the subtle and the mental planes. It's very baffling to try to read this Sufi and Vedantic stuff, but some of this is there. But there are all these different versions of it. It's quite hard to, like sometimes the Sufis will talk about 7 stations, the station of hope, the station of love. I forget what they are. There are things like that. Not the 7 planes as Baba. Now probably if one knew more about it, you could find a lot of what Baba says in those traditions. But Baba has really given a very clear picture of the inner landscape you journey through. And the culmination of it is the realization, I am God. Vedanta has said that, and more Vedanta than everywhere else. But this is giving to humanity the understanding that the soul is identical to God. The soul is God and rejoins God at the end. So these are some of the some of the elements in this narrative that we've got.
I wanted to say, there's that chart in the back of God Speaks with the terminology equivalents.
Yeah.
I think it's a mistake to think, you get the impression from that is that there really is a correspondence. But it doesn't really work because those, as you say, Baba's scheme is unique and those other traditions don't lay it out in the same way. So they
Yeah.
representatives of those traditions would not necessarily agree.
They wouldn't
that,
acknowledge it at all.
Right.
Like they have a Sufi term for sanskaras or impressions, but I actually haven't seen anything in Sufism like that. Yeah, and there are a lot of other things like that. This would be a topic of infinite interest to me. Baba's use of terms and some of the questions that arise. He's both used from other languages and the change in his own terms, like involution in infinite intelligence. Involution means the going back to sleep, the withdrawal of consciousness into itself, going back to sleep. But then he changed the meaning of the word later on. Now, I do also want to emphasize that though the divine theme is really central to Baba's metaphysical exposition of things, there's a lot else that he gave too. And some of the things, for example, have to do... Okay, let's suppose you have a storyline, a novel, a great story, right? As I was saying, the divine theme is like the plot. But a storyline requires a setting also. Like, if I'm running around, people are trying to shoot me, and I'm trying to do some great adventure story up here in North Myrtle Beach. Well, we have, 34th Street and Highway 17, and we have trees, and we have helicopters. In other words, there's setting. There's an environment in which it occurs. So it's not just the plot. And there are also the agents, the individualities who are involved in it. Me and the bad guys and all the other people in the picture. They're human. They're birds and dogs. A dog comes and bites me, or all that kind of thing. So now Baba gave us a lot of understanding about those things also. The environment, you might say, in which the divine theme occurs. Now here is just in brief what a few of those things are. Baba explained to us, for example, that there are 3 spheres: the mental sphere, the subtle sphere, and the gross sphere. I'm sure you're all acquainted with that. Right. Since most of you are up on the mental planes, and you can probably still remember the gross sphere if you try hard enough. Actually, in God Speaks, Baba, and throughout his lifetime, a real basic triad of Baba's is knowledge, power, and bliss. And that's very relevant to this whole architecture of creation. In fact, if you read God Speaks, I'm going to knock the books over. In fact, knowledge, power, bliss is the basis for the mental, subtle, and gross spheres. Knowledge, that nature of God, he calls them in one place, the 3 natures of God. Knowledge is the foundation for the mental sphere. Power is the foundation for the subtle sphere. And bliss is the foundation for the gross sphere, as a matter of fact. Yeah, it is. It's actually part of the architecture, though one might not ordinarily think of it, the 3 states of sound sleep, dream, and wakefulness. Now that's in Vedanta, but it's very, very relevant at many, many different points of Baba's explanations of things. For example, you could say in brief, we begin in sound sleep. The entire evolution is a divine dream. That term is used in God Speaks. Human form is gross conscious wakefulness. Then you pass through an infinite intelligence. The involutionary journey is characterized as a kind of dream in full wakefulness. And then you return to sound sleep and wakefulness in the state of God realization. So these 3 states, sound sleep, dream, and wakefulness, in various forms come up all over the place. As a matter of fact, in God Speaks, in my understanding of it, that long chapter 8 where you go, I was mentioning before, the second pass through the divine theme occurs in chapter 8. Well, I think a lot of the point of that is to bring the divine theme in relation to sound sleep, dream, and wakefulness, knowledge, power, bliss. Another trinity is creator, preserver, destroyer.
Those do correspond very well to Vedanta.
Right, they do.
The sound, sleep, dream, and wakefulness,
Right.
Or then they have the 4th state, which
Triovasta.
transcends.
That's right. Yeah, Vedanta, in Shankara, this is very central. As a matter of fact, creator, preserver, destroyer, as many of you will know, is straight out of Hinduism, more modern Hinduism, as a matter of fact, the last 1,000, 1,500 years. So a lot of this stuff, and even the division into 2 or 3 spheres. Baba actually has both if you go between infinite intelligence and later stuff. That also you'll find in both Hinduism and Islam. Well, he did draw some material from Sufism too, but to tell the truth, I really think he took more from India and Vedantism and the other things than from anywhere else. And well, what to say? They also hogged most of the perfect masters.
So that's why he was born in India.
Yeah. India selfishly monopolized on the Sadgurus and the spiritual hierarchy. Well, we should file a complaint. Yeah. But in a lot of these areas about cosmic architecture, Baba very much clarified and gave a stamp to things, but certain amount of this content was available also. But now I mentioned, about if a storyline occurs in a setting, well, and you've got you have a setting in which it occurs, and there are also the characters, the agents, the people who do it. Well, Baba had a lot to say about this. That is to say, we have 5 perfect masters, right? That's something quite new. Baba explained perfect math, the Sadguru, the Jivan Mukta, the Paramahansa, the Majub. I mean, I know all of this is at your fingertips, unless you happen to be... Other types of perfect ones, yeah. And Baba really clarified that. That was quite a jumble in Hinduism. These terms got used in every which way. And Baba really, really systematized it. Also, Baba explained about the different types of spiritually advanced persons, musts and saliks. Actually, the best place to go to for that, you won't find much about that. I don't think anything in God Speaks. That particular distinction is Duncan's The Wayfarers and the introduction from Baba in it. That's the best treatment of that subject. Infinite intelligence, Baba keeps going into this topic about peers and walis and all these different types. Throughout Baba's life, Baba kept showing great interest in who the different types of spiritually advanced persons are. And as a matter of fact, this is a continuation of the Jivatma's story in earlier stages. You have birds and worms and, stones and so forth. When they graduate, they become musts and saliks and all this sort of stuff. These are the agents, the individualities who populate this universe. I could really say a lot more about this. This is all just going into it in brief. But that was something that Baba, these ideas were out there and these terms were out there, but they were very, as far as I can tell, confusing. And Baba really sorted it out and clarified it. So this is another thing outside the divine theme proper. And one last thing I wanted to mention outside the divine theme. I'm trying to set the divine theme now in the context of other content that Baba gave that is part of our legacy. Baba said a good bit about, in philosophy or theology, you'd call this soteriology, how you get saved, how you get out of this mess, what the path is out. Now, in God Speaks, you'll find almost nothing about that. Baba tells you what the story is, but if you want to know how to get out of it, I suggest you try the discourses. The discourses are all about that, but God Speaks says very little. Infinite Intelligence has a whole section on it, as a matter of fact. But one of Baba's main themes on this comes straight out of Hinduism. That is the 3 paths of knowledge, action, and devotion or love. These are dhyan, karma, and bhakti, traditional idea. And Baba embraced this idea wholly from early on until late. You'll find it all over the place in the discourses under various names. And infinite intelligence, as I say, culminates in a treatment of those 3 yogas and how you get rid of sanskaras in each of them. Now, the last, how are we doing for time? Is it? The last thing I really wanted to go into about this booklet specifically has to do with these 2 charts. So just to take a good close look at them, and one reason why they might warrant close examination, as I mentioned earlier, was the fact that Baba had his people meditate on them for 12 hours straight at Mehrabad. Yeah. At the end. No, you had Padri behind, and if they sort of took their eyes away from the chart, boom! Yeah, I don't know any more details about it. Although I do know this, that it occurred, the setting for that gathering was the Sai Darbar. You know, there are historic site markers at Mehrabad now, and if you cross the highway going from the old Pilgrim Center, Lower Mehrabad, going on the road up the path up the hill, shortly after you cross the road, I don't know what, 50 yards up or something, there's a marker on the left-hand side for the Sai Darbar. That was a building that Baba had in 1926 and used it for all sorts of functions. And it was torn down in 1926. Baba had this habit of building things and tearing them down all like the destructive child that he is. But the foundation was still there in those days, in 1943. So a pandal was set up there, and that's where this meeting occurred, as a matter of fact. How they did the meditation, I have no idea. Did they wander around like majubs around Mehrabad and fall into wells, or did they all sit on the platform, or did Padre beat them with a cane when their attention drifted? I haven't the slightest idea. But okay, here's, as Laura mentioned earlier, these were drawn by Rano. They have been redrawn in God Speaks. You'll see this content running down, I'm on chart 1 here, running down the left-hand side. And on this second chart, there's more content. Well, actually, this is continuous. When you go from here to here. And this is not exactly taken from the main text, but it paraphrases chunks from the main text. I have no idea how this was selected, and actually I don't know who Baba got to write up the divine theme either, the text of it. Usually he had somebody. My guess would be Dr. Ghani is the best shot, because he was around and he was editing the Meher Baba journal the year before and stuff like that. But it could have been someone, it had to be someone from the home team, and that was World War II, where there couldn't be people running in from afar so easily. So now this chart, the basic elements of it, I'll just go over it. Maybe this is too rudimentary, I don't know, but you have this, he calls it the descent, and then that is the movement from God, that is the movement down to stone state, and this is the road of ascent. I'm sorry, I'm going the wrong way. The descent goes this way, and the ascent goes that way. I got it wrong. And it says in the Divine Theme that this is paradoxically presented. And as a matter of fact, this is another very consistent usage in Baba's presentations from beginning to end. He always calls the journey from the original state, before creation, down to our human state. It's a descent. There really is an up-down in this creation, and we're at the bottom of it. And then we complete the descent in the first human form. And then the involutionary journey is actually an ascent.
I wanted to point out that in the current New Age thinking that's popular, the very opposite is stressed. And they don't like the idea of hierarchy. This is one of the reasons that people reject Meher Baba as soon as they hear a few of these words.
Right.
And they also don't like the idea of ascent because it implies a hierarchy.
Yeah.
And it's considered to be this masculine version of religion as opposed to this feminine,
where you
whatever.
just, I don't know, where you just sort of are happy where you are and wallow in it. Okay. Yeah, David?
I can't remember where I read this. It's kind of stuck with me for a while. That, dogs and cats and animals really are in some ways conscious of the astral or the subtle. And
dogs and crows.
And as you
dogs and crows of all things.
And like stone forms would be conscious of the sixth plane and the mental, but they don't realize what they're experiencing though until they go back up in the path of involution, and they return to essentially the same consciousness, but now they realize what it meant. And so, like, a vegetable would be on the fifth plane. Have you ever heard that?
You know, I've never.
I could never find it again.
No, it's sort of there. What you're saying is kind of
So when you eat
you're
a
not
carrot,
really aware. Just because you see something doesn't mean you understand what you're seeing.
so when you eat a carrot that's on the fifth plane, Muhammad the Must, who is also on the plane, says, "Stop that."
Well,
I don't know. Here's what I have sort of gathered, although I haven't seen this presented explicitly. In some way, the journey of involution does retrace the path that you went going down. But in evolution, you wouldn't have been conscious of it, because consciousness was only evolving. But maybe you move through the same impressions or the same density of impressions.
right. That's what it said. You don't really realize the stone doesn't realize what it's experiencing.
It's not conscious yet.
And it's interesting how Baba is always saying, become dust at the Master's feet. And the soul in the sixth plane is really like dust. Has returned to the stone form, in a sense.
Infinite intelligence, Baba uses the trope several times of stone. He uses stone there, not dust. Stone has almost no egotism, but it also has almost no consciousness. Human being has full consciousness, but also has complete egoism. So what you need to do is combine the human state with the stone state.
And become stoned.
Become stone. That's it. That's what Bob Dylan was referring to with everybody must get stoned. He was talking about the need to complete the involutionary journey. So now, what this chart shows, here's one thing that it shows. You see how this, okay, we have the different kingdoms, stone, metal, vegetable, worm, fish, birds, animals, up to human, right? Now, you notice how this line keeps twisting. There are 7 major twists in the journey of the evolution of consciousness as sanskaras wind. Some of you will know that the Baba's use of the figure of the ball of string and sanskaras in the discourses. This is the same basic idea. And look here the direction reverses, right? At this point after human form, the point is that sanskaras are unwinding from that stage on. Now, yeah.
But is there any relation to that to the structure of DNA?
I don't know. I could do a little rap on something related to that, but I don't really know. Yeah, no, that'd be interesting. It'd be nice to get a real scientist, biologist engaged in some of these things. Now, in the course of this, you see the red here is sanskaras, the red circles, you see them? And the point is throughout evolution, sanskaras increase, and the blue here is consciousness. So consciousness is increasing as sanskaras are increasing up to human form, right? But through involution, consciousness remains the same and sanskaras diminish to nothing. So that's how Baba is depicting that particular idea. Now this, I won't have time to go into, but actually these are the spheres. This is the gross sphere, and these are the lines of connection between the individualities, the souls, and the gross sphere. And what it means to say is that the stone or the plant experiences within this sphere. Now, I think people would have completely taken this for granted and not given any importance to it were it not for infinite intelligence, where you learn a lot about this. This is actually the body of Ishwar. I'll just allude to this. There isn't time to go into it now. This is the body of Ishwar, or the body of the imagination, the gross, subtle, and mental spheres. And the individuality, the Jivatma, or infinite intelligence calls it the thinking, experiences its own little bit within the body of the imagination, or the illusion, or the body of Ishwar. Now, this particular feature of the chart, I'm sure Baba must have explained all this stuff to the group assembled at the time. I'm sure he must have. You notice how all these lines from souls in evolution up through animal kingdom just come to the surface of the circumference of the circle, whereas the lines coming from human form go into the interiority of the circle. Now, this is explicitly explained in the discussion of the book. The significance of this is that until human form, you're only experience various surfaces of the gross sphere. I mean, imaginatively speaking, let's suppose you're a fish. Well, you're sort of experience water and a certain environment within the water. Or I always, somehow comes to mind, one of these insects that zooms along the surface of the center lake. Their whole universe is this little surface area. But in human form, you can experience the gross sphere in its entirety. And I think the modern age illustrates this beautifully. Look at what science has done. They can tell you that, the universe is 14 billion years old and all sorts of things about the gross sphere, because the human consciousness can master the gross sphere in its entirety, as could not be done before. Now, the souls in the subtle planes experience the subtle sphere. For some reason, this distinction doesn't come up. It would probably be too hard to explain it and represent it, is what I think. And souls from the mental sphere, and mental conscious souls, experience the mental sphere. Again, in infinite intelligence, the thing is that the individuality, the thinking, you might say partakes or experiences from within that body of the imagination that is a sphere, that body of the imagination being created by Ishwar, creator, preserver, destroyer. Some of you must have read Infinite Intelligence, right? And maybe some of you will recall what I'm alluding to. Now, in these God-conscious souls here the lines go in the opposite direction, because this is above this arc is the sphere of illusion, you might say. But these souls are in the God state, so the lines go that way only. And here, down at the bottom, there's a line towards God beyond. How I think that should be read is beyond beyond. By the way, the term the beyond state, as best I can tell, only emerged in God Speaks somewhere around page 70. That term Baba hadn't used before. So when you see God beyond in earlier stuff, it usually means beyond beyond. Now, this is the master soul. And just to illustrate quickly, in the 10 States of God chart, where is it? Keep opening to the divine theme in God Speaks. Yeah, it's the same thing. See, the 7 colored concentric circles. So this idea stuck. Baba used it again in God Speaks, and this would be a worthy discussion in its own. But the master soul means perfect master or avatar. Both here and in the chart in God Speaks, Baba uses the same description for both. And you see the different lines? This means the master soul, the Sadguru or the avatar, is connected with all, this is the line here, with all the souls in evolution. It's connected with all the souls in reincarnation. Those are these different chappies here. With the subtle, mental, conscious souls, and also with the God-realized ones. See the line here connecting the master soul to the people in the God state. And he's also connected to the beyond state. When you read Infinite Intelligence, there are a lot of terminological blocks. You have to, hurdles. Doug?
There's one line that comes from Ishwar that...
Ishwar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That,
the gross sphere, you mean?
Right, it's not right next to animal forms, but the line comes down and says human. And then the next series of lines says human form. Yeah,
now this is another, I'd like to have further explanations. Someday, when Baba starts realizing that he needs to sort of do what I want him to do, He's been quite resistant. He's got the opposite idea at present. But there's a lot of questions, and this is one of them. But you'll see here there are 7 circles under each kingdom, under stone, and the 7th is some sort of a special, significant one. And under animal, the 7th is human. And what I take that to mean that the very culmination of animal evolution is the first human form, which then is fully expressed here. That's what I would take that to mean. But apparently there are 7 phases or steps or categories under each of these kingdoms too. There's a big numerological component to Baba's teaching, as a matter of fact. It's all over the place. And what else I had? Oh yes, and we have here all these different things. Men, women, Germans, English, French, Americans, Indians, Persians, Mohammedans, Hindus, Christians, Parsis.
Australians aren't on there.
We could have a whole lot. Well, that's because Australians really are not very important. Negligible. Well, Baba did this in 1943, but if he had done this in 1956, man, they'd be on top. Actually, this question came up with Baba. Is this list a hierarchy? And Baba said there's no significance to it at all. These are just illustrative categories. That's all. Darn it! But I mean, this was World War II, so Germans were on top. You know, all this sort of thing. So these are some of the features of this chart. So distinguishing them, the single thing I would do to distinguish them is this chart brings out the relationship between the individualities, the jivatma, and the spheres, or the imagination as infinite intelligence would have it. In infinite intelligence, if there were time, I could point out a chart in God Speaks that brings out the same theme. You would never know the significance of this without reading Infinite Intelligence. Now, this is completely different. This has nothing to say about the spheres, the gross subtle mental spheres. This is really more about psychology and the evolution of the psyche. And I don't mean nowadays when you think of psychology, I think of Freud or Jung or I don't know what Skinner. What are psychologists into now? I'm not up on it. But sort of an older definition of it would be the structure of the self, of the individuality, of the human mind, of the pre-human mind. And that would be a better characterization of this. And here, this way of analyzing the psychologists, this is actually a place to go for people. Some of the content here you will find nowhere else in Baba's teaching. It's not even explained in the booklet. You have to just sort of study the chart to get some of this. Now, Baba has presented the structure of the individuality, the structure of the psyche, in terms of concentric circles, right, with the soul in the center. And in this, Baba appears to have followed the practice in Vedanta and Shamkhya and some of these ancient Indian schools of philosophy where they did the same thing. They don't have exactly the same categories that Baba did, but there is a relationship in certain places. Now, I'll look here at the ordinary human beings. You have the soul at the center, and the soul is identical with God, right? And then outside of that, there are 7 concentric circles. And they alternate between that orange-red color and black, I think, just to help sort them out more easily. But earlier, you see there are fewer concentric circles. Now, I don't know if you're interested in this, but I find it fascinating. In stone form, there are only 2 circles. There's the gross body, and there's consciousness. That's all. Now, I'll say right now, the entire human form is latent in the jivatma from the very beginning. Stone form has the entire human form. So I don't think this means that there isn't a subtle body or there isn't a mental body, or these other things. I think what it means is it's completely unexpressed. It's meaningless to talk about these things at that stage. Yeah.
Same thing true that all these other forms of relation to us.
Yeah. The residue of impressions is there, and yeah. So when you call someone a blockhead, it's quite literally true. Yeah. Now, in the vegetable form, there's an additional layer there, instinct in most undeveloped form. See that? Most undeveloped instinct. And I'll say right now, if you read Infinite Intelligence, the general term applying to this ring throughout this whole movement is Chaitanya. Baba gave the term Chaitanya to this. But in these earlier forms, Chaitanya takes the form of instinct. But then in the next one, worms and reptiles, okay, you have the gross body. Now you have an undeveloped subtle body also. That's become part of the picture. Okay, instinct is there and consciousness there, most rudimentary. So you have a development and a individuation and a greater level of complexity. In birds and animals, you have the same thing. In addition, the subtle body gets more developed. Instinct is more developed. Gross body, consciousness, what's new there? No, I guess that's the same, isn't it? Partially developed intellect starts, well, that's fully developed instinct. Chaitanya is starting to acquire a little bit of intellect there. So this will be quite interesting. I'm sure scientists working in consciousness and the development of consciousness through the pre-human forms will have frequent recourse to this chart in centuries ahead. But now in human form you get the fully developed false self. And now some of this stuff is really quite new. Okay, here are the 7 circles. The innermost is just the soul, which is the same thing as God. The first circle, moving outward, the first circle is consciousness. Then the next circle is the seat of individuality. That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? The next circle outside of that, if you see it here, is sanskaras, or unexpressed desires. That's an interesting way of characterizing what sanskaras are. The next circle outside of that is intellect. That had been instinct in the pre-human forms. The next circle outside of that is the mental body, then the subtle body, and then the gross body. Now, this is another interesting thing that I don't see anywhere else in any of Baba's literature. This, you see here, these 2 circles are bracketed together. That is, sanskaras and the seat of individuality, right? These 2 concentric circles. If you take those 2 together, you get ego. Now that's the only formal definition of ego like this that I've seen anywhere in Baba's thing. If you take together these 2 concentric circles, the circle of sanskaras and the next inner circle, the seat of individuality. If you mix sanskaras with the seat of individuality, that is the definition of ego. Doug, did you?
Would you say that personality is nearly the same as individuality? Does Baba use the word personality?
I haven't ever seen him use it in these discussions.
Okay.
That'd be hard to answer. It'd take a lot of thinking about that. But the next, you'll see another bracket up earlier, the next above that. This is the mental body combined with the intellect. You see that? Here's intellect is one of the circles, and mental body is another. If you put those 2 together, you get mind.
Mm-hmm. So, Ward, what's the origin of the term ego? Is that is it like come out of, it's Greek?
It means I. Yeah. I-ness. There's a good Sanskrit word that Baba will use similarly, ahamkara. The aham means I. The I-doer, the ahamkara.
So Baba discoursing on these matters
in, in Gujarati. Yeah, he would probably use that, and he does. In some of the earlier talks, he does use that. Some of the early Indian schools of philosophy are very articulate on a lot of these topics. As I say, this basic scheme of having concentric circles, a lot of that comes straight from there. The word intellect would probably, in this usage, would probably be best rendered through the Indic word buddhi, as in, that's one of the components of the antakarana.
Though I mean, the feeling of I is neutral in itself. Then there's also a real ego, as well as a false ego.
Well, there's a divine ego at this level.
So that would be the feeling of I, God.
Yeah, I-ness. So I-ness is not inherently necessarily bad. There is that's I think the second circle in the master's body. Unlimited divine ego. So if you're into the unlimited divine ego, you can be as egotistical as you want.
You know, those different, I was always curious because those different aspects of mind where you find different Sanskrit words for, buddhi and all that.
Right.
You know, whereas in English we just have this word mind.
Yeah.
Now that when Baba talked about the annihilation of the mind.
What was he talking about?
There was that manas.
Right.
Or
Mano,
and what was the difference between all those? That got very confusing.
Well, here's one thing. When you read Baba's literature, he will use... Baba, I feel, was very free from words. And I've been a person free from them. And I'm also very conscious of the fact that most other people aren't free from them either.
You want them to be precise.
Right, and you want them to be stable and stuff. But Baba would actually use them to express what he wanted to express. So you can't count on the same word always meaning the same thing from beginning to end. For example, the word mind here means a combination of mental body and intellect, but I don't think it always meant that in the course of Baba's writings. But nonetheless, this is well worth, for people who like it, or like the sort of, this is well worth meditating on.
But so he wants us to understand this, but he doesn't want us to really pick over it analytically, I don't think, because then we'll get really confused.
Yeah, well, maybe he wants us to pick it over and get totally confused and have our minds annihilated in Mananaj. Yeah. Yeah.
Talking about that and just looking at the next caption here, advanced up to the third plane.
Yeah.
It always seemed to me when I read God Speaks that planes 1, 2, 3, and 4 were planes of the subtle world, and planes 5 and 6 were the mental world. And then later I started to see, of course, where it said that the fourth plane is sort of partly in the mental and partly in the subtle. And, but that still didn't make sense to me, and so I picked over and really analyzed what it said in God Speaks, and most of the time it really does say that people on the fourth plane are in the subtle world.
Yeah, that is generally so. But sometimes he would sort of use the fourth the other way. One thing about all of this is that I think to really know what the fourth plane is, you have to go there. And whether you characterize it as being in the subtle or the mental plane is just for the understanding of dummies, And really, if you actually got there, it would be something completely different from what you imagine. So apparently, sometimes it's better to characterize the fourth plane on the mental side of things. But okay, just a few other things about this. Anyway, I hope you can see this is stuff that you really won't find elsewhere. When I say reading Baba's charts closely, you'll find things. I mean, this is a good illustration of that. When you get to the advanced souls, like David was mentioning, up to the third plane, what had been intellect now becomes inspiration. And in the next one, that same circle, that's what the fourth circle in from the outside is, illumination. So instinct becomes intellect, becomes inspiration, becomes illumination. If you go to infinite intelligence, as I say, the category there is Chaitanya. That's the general term for that aspect, that thread in consciousness.
individual thing?
Chaitanya is a generic term for that element within the individuality that evolves from instinct to intellect. But here you wouldn't know that, but infinite intelligence is quite explicit about it. Baba's use of Chaitanya, I think, was quite different from the way it's often used in Hindu discourse. But now the master's soul is, again, when Baba starts realizing he needs to get in line and answer my questions. I've got some for him here, but here you have 7, he's full of all these teasers. Again, there are 7 circles, but they don't exactly match. You have gross body, subtle body, mental body. So the avatar has those bodies. The next one is universal body and universal mind. And Baba would from time to time refer to that, but never really gave a good explanation. But I have some theories for another occasion. At least I think there's some stuff from infinite intelligence that I think might speak to that. Inside of that you get universal divine ego, as we were mentioning, and unlimited divine ego. And what I personally suspect is that this has something to do with individuality. You know how when someone becomes God realized, that individuality, or let's say a perfect master drops his body, the individuality remains, even though he remerges into God in the beyond state or wherever that would be. How, and in our God Speaks meetings and God Speaks in Mehrabad, we would hash it out. How could that possibly happen? If you're one, how can you be individual? But that seems like individuality probably links to this circle, the unlimited divine
Isn't
ego.
that what individual means, though? Not divided?
Yeah, but then how can you have one individuality do it, not everybody else? That question is dealt with in the discourses. And Baba says realization of God is individual. Otherwise, when one soul got God realized, the entire universe would dissolve. Everyone would. So apparently individuality continues in the state of unlimited unity and oneness. And as I'm saying, I bet you that has something to do with this circle.
Yeah, there's another difference between ordinary humans and the two advanced.
Yeah.
I was wondering if you could address that. And in the ordinary, the arrow goes from the soul to the gross, and
Yeah.
it goes from the soul to the subtle.
Oh, yeah.
But also, thinking, then it goes soul to the mental, but it also, you think of the mental as being more advanced and more expansive, but it seems to exist inside of the subtle. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, this is from the innermost to the outermost. So inside, the inner represents a higher degree of spiritual development. But yeah, I'm glad you brought this out. I forgot to mention this. You see, here there's a line that goes from soul all the way out to the outermost ring of gross body. You see that circle? What that means is we're gross conscious, that the consciousness goes out from the soul all the way to the gross body. And in fact, the same thing is there in stone form. It goes from soul out to gross body. You see that in all the previous circles. They all go out to gross body. That means all of these individualities are gross conscious. But in the case of stone, it doesn't have to go very far, right? Not far at all. In the case of the ordinary human, it has to go a great distance. That is part of why human beings, we're at the bottom. It's the descent. We're farthest. We're farthest from reality. A stone is very close. There's just this little thing. All that stone lacks is consciousness. That's all. But they're way ahead of us otherwise.
It's about the individuality. My favorite little story of the discourse is about the frog is sitting on a leaf and this ant is in the water.
Yeah.
Saying, help, the world is drowning.
Yeah.
And they get into this conversation while he's drowning. He says,
Right.
what do you mean the world is drowning? You're drowning.
Right.
He says, no, but when I drown,
Right.
it's
Right.
as if the whole world drowned.
And when Baba glosses that, he takes the side of the ant. He says, yeah. So when you go merge into God, the entire universe disappears from you. So And what else did I want to say about this? Well, maybe that's one of the last things I wanted to say. Oh, no, I wanted to say this too. Just a last thought. This is one of the things I'm thinking about right now. We have gross... Oh, yeah, okay. In the subtle advanced souls up to the third plane, this same line, now it's pointing downwards, goes from soul to subtle body. You see that? And that means that the subtle conscious individuality is conscious of the subtle body. There's a lot in these charts. They're really worth looking at closely. And here it goes down to mental body, and that's because the mental conscious soul is conscious of the mental body. And looking at this chart, what has occurred to me is I always assumed that the mental body meant something equivalent of the mind or the ego or the individuality. It was the basic structure of my false self. But you know, I'm starting to think from this that maybe not. Maybe there's just like an actual mental body, and there's lots of other stuff there too when you get up into the mental. Is anyone here on the fifth or sixth plane? Yeah, Carolyn is, but people on the fifth or sixth plane usually are, you know, keep mum about it all. So maybe the mental body is just sort of it's like a physical body. I'm a physical body, but I'm in a certain environment, and there's all sorts of other stuff out there too. And maybe the mental, there's also the intellect, there's also the sanskaras, there's all these other things in addition to your mental body. Anyway, for the psychologists of the future, we'll definitely have to sort these questions out. Corinne?
Didn't Phyllis Frederick at least once say that there were other people there in the room that the rest couldn't see?
Oh.
Yeah. Well, maybe I should be asking some of them. Since all you dummies can't. Yeah, no. Well, yeah. Probably on the fifth and sixth plane, there's all sorts of people there. These musts are probably, you know, hanging out with other musts all the time. They just don't look like it. David?
One of the most important parts of God Speaks for me is that last chapter where it says the real truth is way beyond what
any understanding and any intellect.
And all this. And I wrote this in order to, I guess, temporarily quiet your mind. So
yeah, ultimately we'll never understand all of these things. Okay, well, just in conclusion on the divine theme then. Yeah. But now, I mean, whether this is your cup of, I mean, I love this sort of stuff, but whether this is exactly your cup of tea or whether it is not, just look at how much there is in this one chart. And it certainly will be of great interest to people who are into psychology or spiritual psychology or things like that. In the future, they'll spend huge amounts of time with this. And this is just one of two charts in this little booklet that for the most part Baba lovers have really not paid much attention to for a long time. So there are tremendous riches in the stuff Baba has given us. And when you look closely, if you take an interest in this, there are treasures all over the place. And Baba would just, here's one of the ways I know that he wasn't a philosopher or scholar, is that philosophers and scholars don't, the combination of these two circles comprising ego, there's no deficiency in that department. They've got a lot of it. And if a philosopher or a scholar comes up with a new idea, they get out their trumpet and go blow it to the entire world for the rest of their lives. But Baba would come out with these extraordinary revelations and just go on, you know. And it's here for anyone who, but he wasn't, I mean, any ordinary intellectual would develop these things and explain them and integrate them. But Baba was not that. He was the avatar. But he gave these little keys that are in profusion all over the place, in every aspect of his life, not just these books of his, but they're certainly here, that are of really great value for those who have it in their destiny to follow up on them. That's all that I had to say.
Thank you.
Hey, Baba, thank you very much.